Hi, everybody. Brad Truax from Eastman Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're going to do an update on white-tailed deer. We're doing this update primarily because this is the time of year that people are very likely to encounter newborn fawns. And you need to know what to do if you do encounter one, and especially what not to do if you encounter one. So here we go. The white-tailed deer, again, is the most common large animal that we have here at Eastman. There are about 100,000 white-tailed deer in New Hampshire, and it's a member of the ungulate class. That basically is the class of hooved animals, mammals. An adult deer typically weighs between 150 and 300 pounds. Mature females are only about two-thirds the size of the mature males. And the most salient characteristic of the white-tailed deer is the white underside of its tail. And when that's raised, it serves as an alarm to warn the other deer that a predator may be nearby. They usually have a reddish brown coat in the summer, and it tends to be more grayish brown in the winter, providing some camouflage. And their winter coats have hollow hair shafts that fill with air. These serve both as insulation and provide some buoyancy when they're in water. And they can run up to 40 miles an hour and jump up to 9 feet high and 30 feet forward. And they're also very good swimmers. Uh, Interestingly, they're relatively colorblind. They have what we call dichromatic two-color vision, where they see primarily blue and yellow, but they're very poor at distinguishing oranges and reds. That stand out so well to we humans. And for a deer, this is certainly a vulnerability during hunting season. So here's a picture. Again, deer can jump 9 feet high, 30 feet forward. Okay, they can actually jump over a car. So that last buck didn't quite make it. Okay, hopefully that won't happen to you. So the guard hairs, deer have an outer coat of guard hairs and an inner coat of thick fur. And the short guard hairs in the summer are replaced by longer, kinkier ones in the winter. And those guard hairs are filled with air, and that provides both insulation and it provides some degree of buoyancy if they happen to be swimming. Here in this photo, you're seeing some guard hairs that were seen in a deer bed. So here are the long guard hairs against some leaves that were in the deer bed. So again, white-tailed deer in the wetland. We mentioned that deer are very good swimmers, but they also like to cross over our beaver dams. The beaver dams are constructed of branches, rocks, leaves, and other debris, and they're filled with mud from the stream bottom, and they're watertight and they're incredibly strong. So these game cam videos show deer crossing over a beaver dam here at Eastman. There you can see them getting ready. That beaver dam can hold their weight. Here's another one. This is taken again at nighttime. And he's walking across one of our beaver dams here at Eastman. Okay, the males have antlers and they regrow those antlers every year. And very rarely females might have antlers. But as the antlers grow, they get covered by a highly vascularized tissue known as velvet. And the antler size typically increases with the age of the deer. The bucks shed their antlers when all the females have been bred. So that may be anywhere from late December to early February. And the male deer is known as a buck, and the antlers are the most striking feature of the buck. And hunters often score the bucks by the number of points on their antlers. So again, this is showing the points. Basically, these are the tines that are branching off the main beam of the antler, and they have to be at least 1 inch. And as I said, hunters often score their buck kill by the number of points that the antlers had. So again, white-tailed deer have adapted to a variety of habitats. Now, there are over 30 million deer in the United States and probably about 100,000 here in New Hampshire. In the Northeast, they're primarily forest animals, but they've also been known to thrive in suburban areas. The white-tailed deer are mostly crepuscular. That means they're most active at dusk and dawn, and they typically rest during the daytime. So motor vehicle drivers need to be especially aware of deer that are out feeding around the time of dusk because they're very difficult to see and they're adjacent to the roads. The white-tailed deer are often solitary, especially in summer, but it's not uncommon to see multiple deer together. And there are two types of deer groups. One is the family group, the other is the buck group. Well, the family group basically is the female, the doe, and any fawns that she may have. And the buck group usually consists of 3 to 5 bucks that have a very strict dominance hierarchy. And it's not uncommon to see multiple deer out foraging at dusk or dawn. And if we're out driving and we see one deer crossing the road at night, we usually slow down because it's very likely that there are going to be some others nearby. And in winter, deer may congregate together in deer yards. We'll show you some pictures of those later on. But such congregation can also lead to overbrowsing, increased motor vehicle accidents, and even spread of some diseases. So again, I mentioned before that deer are almost colorblind. They have this dichromatic vision where they see primarily blue and yellow and have difficulty distinguishing oranges and reds. So again, that's certainly a vulnerability when they're being hunted in the fall when hunters are out wearing orange outfits. They may also see some green, and they may also see some ultraviolet light that we can't see. Okay, they're actually about 20 times more sensitive to ultraviolet light range than we are. And that may actually help them see what we call rubs and scrapes. More on that later on. But they can see these at night. And some new research suggests that fresh rubs and scrapes may actually fluoresce at night in the ultraviolet spectrum. Okay, you've heard the phrase deer in the headlight. Well, white-tailed deer are shy by nature and they're fairly easily spooked. But when you see the phrase like a deer in the headlight, it means that the deer suddenly stand still when the headlights shine on them. And this does not mean that they're paralyzed with fear or that they're not very intelligent. Rather, the headlights temporarily blind them, and that's what causes them to freeze. So, what do white-tailed deer eat? Well, they're exclusively herbivorous. Okay, so that means that their diet consists of woody shoots, stems, leaves of woody plants, as well as grasses, some cultivated crops, nuts, particularly acorns, berries, some wildflowers, fruit, and maybe even corn. And acorns consist of about 25% of their diet in autumn. And the items they feed on are not particularly abundant in mature forests, so sometimes they have to forage mainly around the edges of the forest. And they are ruminants. That means they have a multi-chambered stomach, and that allows them to eat some foods that we humans can't eat, such as certain mushrooms. So deer do what we call browsing. So they're feeding upon twigs, buds, leaves of trees and shrubs. There's a deer that's browsing. So browse is the primary component of their diet, and it's an important source of their nutrition. The deer can easily digest woody browse, and they feed on it year round. And you may identify browse as a sign that deer have been nearby. So again, we're going to see a video here of deer browsing. So there he comes in. Going to move forward. And there he's basically eating some of the twigs and leaves that are in that area. Deer also love hostas. Though they feed on the leaves of many trees and bushes, they really love hostas. And they'll come back again and again to a spot that has hostas. So homeowners need to use fencing or repellents if they really want to save their hostas. So this is what happens if you don't use fencing or a deer repellent. Deer browse left these hostas almost unrecognizable. But the thing I want to show here is note the ragged edges. If you look at the edges That tells you that this was browsed from a deer as opposed to a rabbit or a member of the rodent family. Rabbits or rodents have incisors on both of their jaws. So when they chew on something, it produces a clean cut, okay, whereas the deer leave a ragged cut. So once again, if you want to protect your hostas, make sure that you use either fencing or deer repellents. So again, this image shows the difference between browse from a rabbit and browse from a deer. Here on the left, you see a clean cut, and that's from a rabbit or a rodent that has incisors on both jaws. Over here on the right, you see a very ragged edge, and that was left by a deer. Deer also love mountain maples. Mountain maples are basically understory trees, often on ridges or steep hillsides. We have a lot of them on the lake trail on the the western side of the lake trail here at Eastman, which is fairly steep and drops down to the Eastman Lake. Mountain maple is a preferred winter food for white-tailed deer. Once again, deer are ruminants. That means they have four-chambered stomachs. The first chamber is where the food is stored and it's fermented. So the leaves, the shrubs, the twigs get turned into kind of a froth there. And the deer then regurgitate the cud, they chew it and swallow it again. And the other chambers reduce the particle size, absorb the nutrients, and finish the digestion process. They don't have enzymes to break down the plant cellulose themselves, so they have to rely on bacteria in their gut to do that. That's extremely important. And the microorganisms are very finely attuned to the habitat. And that's the biggest reason you should never try to feed the deer. If you feed the deer, it can actually lead to deer dying. So don't feed the deer. Cast aside your desire to feed those very adorable looking deer. In winter, deer are still eating mostly woody plants, and they require these new microorganisms in their digestive system to be able to digest those woody products. And if you feed them, it either prevents or delays the appearance of those important microorganisms. So feeding them is actually detrimental to their health. And in fact, in 2015, 12 deer were found dead at a site here in New Hampshire where they were being fed. So do not feed the deer, very important. So where do deer sleep? Well, they sleep almost anywhere. They don't have a fixed place to sleep, so they'll sleep wherever it's comfortable and where they're safe from predators. So that could be either dense vegetation in a field or under a low-hanging tree. You might see a depression in the ground or the snow where the deer had bedded down. And a day bed is typically hidden in a sheltered location, while some of their nighttime beds could be found out in the middle of open fields. So here's a deer bed in the snow. So you can see pretty good size there. Deer yards are also important. In winter, when food is less available, many of the deer congregate in what's called a deer yard. And these may be in fields or thickets where some food is available. And their behavior conserves body heat, and it also discourages predators from attacking them. So some of these deer yards are on slopes that face south, and that's so more sunlight can actually warm them. And in winter, once again, they will tend to go in areas that have a lot of evergreen trees like hemlocks, and that's because the hemlocks and the other conifer trees tend to reduce the need for them to walk in snow because that conserves a lot of energy, and it also blocks some of the snow from reaching the ground. So once again, these are often in south-facing slopes, and that protects them from deeper snow, colder temperature, and from the northerly winds. So yarding like this conserves body heat and energy, and once again, because there's so many, it discourages predators. Many deer yards are just a few acres, but some could be as large as 100 acres. And generations of deer will often return to that same deer yard year after year. This is actually showing a more typical size of a deer yard. Once again, I want you to see the eastern hemlocks here, which are basically providing some shelter for them are very important. Those hemlocks will capture some of the falling snow and prevent it from going on the ground, and also block some of the wind. So, very important. So why the white tail? Well, the underside of the tail is white, and when a deer lifts that tail and shows the white, it acts like a flag. It tells all the other deer that there may be danger nearby. So the other deer see the white tail and they begin to run. So there you see them going. White tail is up. It told all the other deer, "Hey, there might be a predator nearby. Let's get out of here." So, deer reproduction, the rut, when the females enter estrus, occurs in fall, usually in late October or early November. Here in New Hampshire, it usually peaks in November. And the males will compete with each other to mate with the females, and they'll mate with as many females as possible. In fact, they're so busy they often forego eating during rutting season. And some does may be as young as 6 months when they reach sexual maturity, but the average age of sexual maturity is about 18 months. And the bucks become sexually mature usually at about a year and a half. The fawns are born in mid to late spring, generally in May or June. And as I mentioned, that's primarily the reason we're doing this update today. Now is the time that you're very likely to see these newborn fawns. And a doe can actually have multiple fawns, even though one is probably more common. And the mother will hide the fawn in vegetation for the first month, and she will nurse the fawns there. The fawns are usually weaned by about 8 to 10 weeks, and it's about that time they lose their characteristic white spots. So there's a beautiful young fawn. Notice the white spots, which are characteristic. And once again, they're usually hidden and nursed in dense vegetation for that first month. And they'll lose those characteristic white spots by about age 8 to 10 weeks. They'll begin to follow their mother around foraging about that time as well. And the fawns are particularly vulnerable to predators. So again, the fawns usually only weigh 6 to 8 pounds at birth. The mother will usually nurse them 4 times a day, and they'll continue that nursing for about 4 weeks altogether. But usually starting at about 2 weeks, they'll begin eating browse. The mother will usually bring that browse back to them, and the mother will then start to teach them how to look for food. So again, does may leave their fawns in hiding places for up to 4 hours or more while they're out foraging. And the coat and the white spots of the fawn usually provide some pretty good camouflage. So while they're waiting for their mother to come back, the fawn usually lies flat on the ground with their necks outstretched, and they're pretty well camouflaged against the forest floor or against the grassy surroundings. So if you happen to stumble upon a fawn by itself, never assume that it's been abandoned or orphaned. Its mother is very likely to return soon. So again, because it's not just the camouflage that's important at protecting the fawn. Adult deer have a scent, a pretty strong scent that predators can smell. Fawns do not have almost any scent at all. So the mother actually leaving actually is a way of protecting that fawn from predators. If the mother was there, the scent of the mother might draw predators in. So again, her being away from the fawn is actually a very good method of protecting the fawn. So if you find a fawn alone, what should you do if you come across a fawn that's alone? Well, first of all, don't panic. It's probably not been abandoned or orphaned. And the mom has likely simply hidden that fawn to avoid predators. Fawns have, as I mentioned, very little scent compared to the adult deer. So the doe leaving the fawn is actually a way of preventing the predators from being drawn to that fawn. And the mom is likely off feeding. She's probably going to return within a few hours to either nurse or feed the fawn. So keep your distance. Don't approach the fawn. Keep your pets away because again, that actually might deter the mom from returning. And never attempt to feed the fawn. They have very sensitive GI systems, and feeding them can be detrimental. So There are certain circumstances where you would notify Fish and Game, and I've given the phone number there. So you would notify them of a possible orphan fawn if, first of all, you found a dead doe nearby. Two, you found the fawn continued running around and crying for an extended period of time, or if it had an obvious injury. So again, if you encounter one, don't panic. It's probably not orphaned or abandoned. So don't approach the fawn or let your pets near it. Don't attempt to feed it. And again, the circumstances where you'd report it to New Hampshire Fish and Game would be if it continued running aimlessly and crying, if it looked injured, or if you found a dead doe nearby. So here's a video courtesy of Terry Radford of such a young fawn. Beautiful little fawn. Looks not quite like he or she knows what he wants to do, but there he goes off into the woods. So there he actually looks like he's doing something he knows about. So fawns are capable of surviving on their own at probably about 45 to 60 days, but they really need to learn more from their mom over the next year. So the female fawns usually stay with their mother for about a year, and then they'll usually establish their own home range somewhere nearby. On the other hand, the males usually disperse after a year and will find new territories. So again, deers have multiple ways of communicating. The fawns bleat, the adult deers grunt and snort, but much of their communication is by other means. We already noted how the raised white tail serves to alert the herd. Scent marking is also very frequent. They will urinate into what we call scrapes. I'll show you that in a minute. And there's also an offensive scent that's released by some glands that's between their hooves. And rubs are marks on trees that are left by bucks using their antlers. We'll show you some pictures of those as well. And this helps mark their territory in addition to polishing their antlers. So here's a scrape. The deer usually uses its hooves to scratch the leaves and the debris out of a small area. So it'll expose the soil underneath. This is usually about 1 to 3 feet wide. And they'll then urinate down their legs. And that picks up some scent molecules from their tarsal glands, and they deposit that into the scrape. And it's used primarily as a communication for mating purposes. Okay, it's not only bears and porcupines that rub the bark off trees. This is due to a deer rubbing its antlers on the tree. Bucks will do this both to polish their antlers, but especially to mark their territory. So again, rubbing by bucks can occur at any time that they have hard antlers, but it usually peaks during the pre-rut period, and they maintain that level throughout the breeding season. And they're rubbing their forehead gland on the tree as well to leave specific information about themselves. So it's particularly useful for mating purposes. Okay, deer tracks. Deer have bilaterally symmetrical hooves, so they have the mirror image of each other. They have sharp tips on the hooves that tend to curve inward. And the rear part of the deer track is usually softer and less well defined. But they typically have a small dew claw on the rear side of the hoof, and that may show up better in the snow and deep mud. So here you look, you're not seeing any dew claws here, but if you look down here, this is an imprint that's left by one of their dew claws. Here's some prints in the snow. So once again here, you're in these, you're not seeing any dew claws, but if you look down here, you're probably just seeing a little bit of an image of a dew claw. So again, this is comparing the deer tracks compared to other ungulates. And again, the deer track is here in the middle. Moose track is over here. This is an elk. This is I believe, a bison, and this is a cow. Okay, and compared to the other ungulates, the deer tracks are probably smaller, and especially the dew claws are more likely to show up with deer tracks than they are with any of the others. Occasionally, you'll see dew claw prints left in a moose track, but they're much more common in deer tracks. This is showing the hoof of a deer. And once again, you can see why we see the tracks that we do. Here are the hooves. They're again curved in, they're kind of pointed. And back here, you're seeing the dew claws. So again, here you're seeing the prints in the mud here, and here are two very good prints of the dew claws. So once again, dew claws are less likely to show up in the other ungulates compared to the deer. The deer track pattern, it really depends on what the deer was doing. You know, the deer may walk, trot, or gallop. Deer scat is another thing that we may see out in the forest. Deer scat appears as firm little black pellets. They're about twice the size of rabbit pellets and about half the size of moose pellets. So they're usually deposited in little mounds along the deer trails, and they may tend to clump together like this. But if a deer is eating a lot of lush green plants, it may appear much looser and kind of watery. It may be a watery clump of pellets. And this is showing the difference between deer scat and moose scat. So in the snow here, on the left are the deer scat, on the right is the moose scat. So again, moose scat is at least twice the size of the deer scat. Deer scat in winter. Now I hate this picture. You should never touch scat with your bare hands. But the reason we're showing that is that here they broke open the scat, and what's inside the scat here in winter looks just like sawdust. And that really shouldn't be surprising because what do deer eat in the winter? They're eating mostly twigs and woody plants. So again, looks just like sawdust. So how long do deer live? Some resources say that the average lifespan is only 2 to 4 years. Others say that a male deer may live 6 years and the female about 12 years. And these lifespans are shorter than those of the other ungulates. For instance, moose tends to live much longer. And some of the average is actually brought down because the fawns may die either due to predation or disease. And deer may die from either being killed by a predator, by a hunter, by motor vehicle accident, or some diseases. But also, once their teeth get ground down too far, they may no longer be able to get enough food to eat. They may actually die from starvation. So who are the predators of the deer? Well, the natural predators are wolves, coyotes, cougars, alligators, jaguars, and rarely bears or wolverines or big eagle. Uh, Quite honestly, here in New Hampshire, really the only predator of the deer is likely the coyote. And interestingly, coyotes usually capture and eat more deer in wintertime. And that's because the deer have hooves, and that makes it difficult for them to break through crusty ice or snow. So they can't run as fast in the winter as they can other times of the year. And that actually makes them more vulnerable to the coyotes. And again, humans are actually probably their biggest predator. Both hunting and motor vehicle accidents are major causes of death for deer. And deer carcasses are often scavenged by coyotes, foxes, raptors like owls and eagles, crows and ravens. And once again, the white tail of the deer serves as an alarm that a predator may nearby and warns other deer that they should run. And when danger is detected, one or more of those deer will raise that white tail to alert the rest of the group. Deer can also swim in a lake or stream in order to escape many predators. So when a predator's nearby, that tail goes up. White-tailed deer are the primary host and vector for black-legged ticks, and that's what causes Lyme disease. So the more deer you have, the more ticks you have. This year, 2026, we expect we're going to have more ticks than last year. And that's because last fall we had a bumper crop of acorns, the favorite food of the deer in fall. And when the acorns are abundant, Deer are healthier and they're more likely to have successful breeding. So their numbers will likely increase in spring. And if you have more deer, you're going to have more ticks. And if you have more ticks, you're going to have more Lyme disease. So the incidence of Lyme disease in humans tends to parallel the size of the deer population. And white-tailed deer also serve as intermediate hosts for many of the other tick-borne diseases. Go to our video on ticks if you want to hear about those other diseases. Deer also serve as a host or vector for a brain parasite that kills moose but doesn't affect the deer. So deer and moose populations tend to be inversely related. So some deer during the COVID epidemic were also found to serve as reservoirs for the COVID virus. And deer are also susceptible to a number of other viruses. And they also get what's known as chronic wasting disease. That's caused by a small particle called the prion that causes degeneration of the brain. Chronic wasting disease hasn't yet been seen in New Hampshire, but it'll get here soon because it's been in all the adjacent states. So again, they're susceptible to chronic wasting disease. Some people call this zombie deer disease. And chronic wasting disease is a progressive fatal neurological disease. Again, it's caused by small particles called prions. And the signs you'd see in the deer would be weight loss, incoordination, drooling, listlessness, lack of fear. And it causes a certain type of change in the brain that we call a spongiform encephalopathy. These are two pictures, microscopic pictures of brain. A normal brain is on this side, an affected brain is on this side. You see all these little holes, almost look like a sponge. And that's where the term spongiform encephalopathy comes from. And chronic wasting disease can affect any hooved animal, so not only deer, but also elk, moose, reindeer, and so on. And it can spread between animals through contact with saliva, blood, urine, or feces of another animal who had chronic wasting disease. And prions can also cause diseases in humans. One is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and they also can produce mad cow disease in cattle. So this is showing the distribution of known chronic wasting disease as of 2024. And you can see it's a lot more common out in the central part of the U.S., and we haven't quite seen a case yet here in New Hampshire. And note that cooking meat doesn't affect the prions. So again, if you were to have venison and so on, cooking the meat does not get rid of the prions. So again, one of the questions we're always asked is, can chronic wasting disease be transmitted to humans? Periodically, there are reports of humans who develop Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease who've eaten venison. And the implication was that they got the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease from the venison. Well, that's not been proven yet. CDC has pointed out that the older age of those humans in those reports is more in keeping with the sporadic cases of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease that we see. So currently, there's no proven link at present, but continued surveillance is certainly indicated. Quite frankly, if I were in an area that had known chronic wasting disease, I probably wouldn't eat the venison. But again, keep in mind that that's an unproven link at this point in time. So deer and moose don't mix. The deer and moose populations are inversely related. And that means that you'll have fewer moose in areas where there are lots of deer, and you'll have more moose in areas where there are few deer. And why? It's because moose are susceptible to a fatal parasite. It's a brain worm, and deer are the vector for that. The deer are basically asymptomatic. They're not affected by this parasite, but the moose are. So the deer aren't, they're carrying the parasite, but they're not affected by it. Deer and motor vehicles also don't mix. So one of the biggest threats to deer is the motor vehicle. And motor vehicle accidents with deer most often occur at dusk or dawn. And they're also more frequent during mating season. So a third of all deer-related motor vehicle accidents here in New Hampshire happen from mid-October through the end of November. And why? That's because it's mating season. And so when you're out driving at dusk or dawn, make sure you're scanning the roadside. If you do see one deer, there are likely going to be some other ones. So slow down and be very vigilant. Here's an interesting observation. In Wisconsin, as wolves spread, accidents between deer and motor vehicles dropped by 24%. Pretty impressive. And it's not just that there was a drop in the deer population because of the wolves. It was speculated that the wolves created the so-called landscape of fear. And that meant that they would usually hunt deer along roads, paths, or power corridors. So the deers pretty much learned that and started to stay away from the roads. And obviously that meant less motor vehicle accidents. Now, we don't have any wolves here in New Hampshire, so that's not going to happen. And I don't think that this would be a good reason to introduce wolves to New Hampshire. The last confirmed wolf sighting in New Hampshire was 1895. So deer hunting, most states do allow deer hunting of white-tailed deer at certain specified times. Here in New Hampshire, hunting season by archery is going to be from September 15th to December 15th of this year. And deer hunting using firearms is November 11th to December 6th. You got to have a hunting license and know that there are limits to the number and the sex of the deer that you can kill. And we always caution hikers to remember to wear blaze orange when they're out hiking during deer hunting season so that they don't inadvertently get shot. So that's a little bit about deer. Once again, it's this time of year that you're likely to encounter the fawns. So it's important that you know what to do if you do encounter a fawn.